We off?
30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes.
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano, and as I alluded to yesterday, the world is still discussing, I don't want to say mourning, because I don't know that it's a universal period of mourning or a universal feeling of mourning. The world is still discussing the passing of Pete Rose, and a big part of that discussion is his life and legacy, and whether or not he should have been in the Hall of Fame years ago, whether or not he should be in the Hall of Fame posthumously. And I've stated that I think it's totally hypocritical of baseball, where if you turn on a baseball game, every single ad is for some sort of gambling empire, sports book, Caesars, you name it. And yet we're still going to ban this guy for life, who did do the wrong thing. I don't want to act like he didn't do anything wrong. We're still going to ban Pete Rose for life in spite of 4,000 hits. I don't see how you do that. Someone who has looked at this issue 6 ways from Sunday is a guy that I haven't had the opportunity to speak to in quite a while, Kostya Kennedy. He is a journalist and author. He's the editorial director at Dotdash Meredith and a former senior writer and assistant managing director at Sports Illustrated. He's also the author of the wildly popular book, Pete Rose, An American Dilemma. Kostya, it's great to talk with you again. How you been?
I've been well, Frank. Good to be on with you.
My pleasure. All right. First, let's get the tough stuff out of the way. Maureen Callahan wrote a book all about the Kennedy men, eviscerating the relations they had from women, going from Joe Kennedy and John F. Kennedy all the way to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Did you feel that book was unfair?
I'm not in that Kennedy clan for worse nor for better, so I have no particular comment on that.
Got it. Okay,
on that book, but I'm not that Kennedy.
Looking for you. Okay, let's talk about Pete Rose. Just going backwards before we get to the sports betting scandal and its implications. Yep. What has he been doing for the last 20 years? I know he's been living out in Nevada. I know he does these. He had been doing these trade shows and conventions and personal appearances. What's life been like for Pete Rose over the last 20 years?
Yeah, he once said to me, I get up every day and I do Pete Rose. And that's kind of what he did. As you said, he was out in Vegas for much of the year, not only doing shows, but he had a booth at a couple of different stores where he would have a sort of appointment for a number of months. And 2 or 3 days a week, he'd sign autographs. And I'll tell you, Frank, there were always people coming to get his autograph. There was no days when there was nobody coming, right? So with a business that paid him some money and brought some traffic into the stores. He did do personal appearances. He also was up and around Cooperstown on induction weekend. So he was basically being himself for all the controversy around him and using his name and his situation to make a living. And that's really what he was doing. He still followed baseball. He still bet on baseball. He still did all the things he'd been doing for many years.
One question I got from a listener yesterday was essentially, how big of a gambler was he these days?
He bet every day on multiple games.
And did that take a toll on him financially? I bet I go to Atlantic City as often as I can, and I can tell you eventually the house always wins. How was his financial situation?
So it's very tough to tell, and I don't honestly, I don't want to say I don't know, but he did not appear to be sort of destitute or anything like that. It's not as if he jeopardized his fortune. I can't imagine he came out ahead, as you said. It's almost hard to imagine that. So anyway, he bet a lot, but obviously he had to keep working. He wanted to keep working. He wanted to keep doing what he was doing. So I would say he probably had an adverse impact, but I don't honestly know the ins and outs of what his financial situation was towards the end.
Pete Rose is one of those guys where the people that talk about him as a player and even as a manager say very laudatory things. His teammates, the players that played under him. A lot of the fan interactions that I've heard about Pete Rose over the years have been kind of negative. They paint a picture of a guy that might have been a little bit negative, that had a bit of an attitude. What's your understanding of what he was like in terms of interacting with the fans?
Well, I'm sure the fans who say that had that experience. Pete was interested in being about Pete, but I will say it's different from my experience with him. He was very sort of chummy and funny with a fan. You know, if you went up to him, he'd ask questions about you. He'd make a joke about your hometown. If you were somebody who he'd run into earlier, he'd ask about your kid, kind of thing. He was really kind of hail fellow, well met around fans. In my experience, now that's not to say that people didn't have other experiences. It didn't get him at a bad time. I always say he was a great guy to kind of hang out and talk with. Certainly a wonderful person to talk baseball with. He really knew the game, had a great memory for it. But he wasn't the sort of guy you would want to be your best friend and be waiting at the airport for him to pick you up, kind of thing. So he was Pete Rose. He was in it for Pete. He didn't want to hurt you, but you were not front of mind. Whoever you were, Pete was front of mind with Pete.
Gotcha. As a player, what was it that made him so special? We have a lot of non-baseball fans listening who maybe have no appreciation for Pete Rose's career as a player. What made him so different, so unique, so special?
His commitment and his love of baseball. And I've been around a lot of baseball players in my life, and there's plenty of guys who really like the game, plenty of guys who, quote-unquote, play it right. Nobody better than Pete Rose. And you can draw an analogy to whatever business any listener might be in. Pete gave his life to the game. He was the first guy there. He took his 30 swings left-handed to 30 swings right-handed. He studied the opposition. He ran hard every minute. He gave every full effort in a way that players didn't do then and don't do now. Extremely, extremely, extremely rare. If you were a paying fan, he delivered on that. On what you paid for, right? You can't guarantee that your favorite player is going to hit home run. He might strike out 4 times. You can't guarantee he's going to make a great catch. He might drop a fly ball in the outfield. But he would give the effort all the time and really, really loved the game. And that's why, he played more games than anybody in baseball history. He came up to bat more times than anybody in history. He got more hit by a lot than anybody in history. And it showed. And that there's nothing, and in some ways it took away from the rest of his life. It certainly took its toll on his relationships, and it gave him this sort of single-minded focus that is in some ways analogous to how he did himself in with the gambling. But it's a real paradox that he, undermined the game the way he did, given what he was for the integrity of the game. He just played with such deep integrity, and people loved him, and other business leaders, the mayor of Cincinnati or business leaders around the country would say, do your job the way Pete Rose does his job, and we're going to be okay. And that's really what he was.
At 30 minutes after the hour, you're listening to The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Kostya Kennedy. He is the author of several books, including Pete Rose, An American Dilemma. It's funny, you made the comparison to comparing him to players of this era, playing today. If Pete Rose played today, in this era of analytics and sabermetrics and social media, how do you think his career and the public perception of him would have been different, if it would have been different?
I think, he might have adjusted his game a little bit. He was kind of a stronger player than he could have hit more home runs than he did, and he might have done that if he thought that's what was going to get him paid. But I think that overall, for a player of his level, he was going to be an elite player in whatever era he played in. Now, he's not a player necessarily on the level of like a Babe Ruth or a Mickey Mantle or a Stan Musial in terms of pure talent. But in terms of his overall production, he is an absolutely elite level player. And I don't know that it would have been that much different. I think that you would have seen somebody, assuming that the other factors of his life, how he was brought up and what got him here were the same. He certainly played the same way whatever money he was making. Same way when he was a rookie and in his early years is when he became the highest paid player in baseball. He always played the same way. I'm not sure it would have been all that different, just maybe a little bit of more emphasis on power hitting over sort of singles hitting and batting average.
We know he gambled. We know that resulted in a lifetime ban. What exactly did he do? There's been a little bit of confusion on this over the years because he denied it for so long, and ultimately he finally admitted it, but I don't know how much of that admission is the truth and the whole truth. From your understanding, what does the objective analysis and the research show about what he did with respect to gambling?
Well, he certainly bet on baseball while a player. And while a manager, he bet on baseball essentially every day on several games, including on the Reds. Not necessarily on the Reds every single day, but very, very often on the Reds. And he bet significant amount of money. So he was, in hundreds of thousands of dollars to the wrong people. And he absolutely bet heavily on baseball. And the fact that he denied it was such an incredible thing because it was the easiest investigation anybody ever had. It's sort of like today when people lie about stuff, but the proof is just there, and people still lie. They were just betting slip after betting slip after betting slip. Yes, somebody could have been making something up, but you weren't going to have 30 people making something up and have his handwriting on betting slips. And he still lied in the face of just absolutely overwhelming evidence that there was no question. So that was all known, and that's what baseball had to work with, and he would never what really undermined him was not only that he lied about it, but he never suggested that he might stop. He never said, hey, you got me. All right, I'll stop betting. If he had done that, Frank, he would have probably gotten a 6-month suspension or whatever. Maybe he had to take a Gamblers Anonymous course or do some community service, and he could have managed the Reds for another 30 years. But he was just not. He was going to do it what he wanted to do, and was not going to give in. So that's really, he's kind of made his own bed. He really was his own undoing.
And you've anticipated my next question in terms of why. Not that you're a psychologist and that you can get into what motivates others, but from your understanding and from the time that you spent on him, in the face of such overwhelming evidence, why would he continue to deny what was so plainly evident, which was that he had bet on baseball? By the way, if people are just tuning in, I'm Frank Morano. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Why would he lie?
Well, Pete, I think he felt bulletproof in some ways, right? Here he was. He did more hits than anyone in baseball, an absolute beloved figure in his hometown where he grew up in Cincinnati, this larger-than-life figure known all over the world. And he felt like, I'm Pete Rose. I'm going to do what I want to do. And he just had that hubris that he couldn't calm in himself. He had a very close relationship with his father, who he lost in 1969. His heavy betting didn't start till much later. I think he knew his father would have been quite ashamed of what had happened and wouldn't have tolerated, and there may have been part of him that sort of wanted to take his own punishment, get the sort of punishment that he deserved. That's going a step further, right? That is a little bit of armchair psychology, but something in there played a factor because he wasn't necessarily book smart, but Pete was not a dumb human being. He was street smart and very quick and perceptive, and he knew that he could have easily righted his own ship, but he just didn't. He just didn't do it for those reasons, for feeling that he could be invincible.
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor, or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. micro-tabb.com.
ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Healthcare professionals can lead their careers with LinkedIn. Discover jobs by specialty, preferred shifts, and even desired salary. From mental health therapists to radiology technicians, it's now faster and easier for healthcare professionals to find the right fit. Learn more at linkedin.com/healthcare. Side effects may include faster job placement, improved work-life balance, and increased career satisfaction.
Take me through Bart Giamatti, the baseball commissioner at the time, his decision to ban Pete Rose for life. Why not a 1-year or a 5-year suspension? Why take that drastic step of banning a player for life?
You know, I think that it's kind of what I was just saying. First of all, I will say that Bart Giamatti loved baseball, and like for many people, Pete Rose was his favorite player. He loved Pete. He would have. They wanted to give him opportunity after opportunity to just come clean in some way, to do some kind of a plea bargain, something, and Pete just wouldn't do it. And Giamatti just didn't want to have to do it. But there was no chance. If you or I or anybody on the face of the earth was commissioner, you had to convict him. Now, whether the lifetime ban or not. You know, I think there wasn't an ounce not only of contrition but of any chance that he would change. And, you know, it's such a dangerous thing. The 1919 White Sox scandal, when I was doing my book, and even today, people still bring it up, right? It's
Sure.
more than 100 years ago. And the damage that it could do to the game, I just think that somebody like Giamatti, you know, who held to sacred truths in a certain way. He was an intellectual. He had certain beliefs and all that. He didn't feel he could jeopardize under his watch the integrity of the game, and that Pete was without question jeopardizing the integrity of the game. So I think it came to that. You know, a lifetime ban didn't mean it couldn't be repealed. And the other thing that's really important to know about Giamatti, he knew that he couldn't have Rose in the game. He couldn't be coaching young players and everything and then going out and betting on the games at night. But he said when he was asked at the press conference announcing Rose's ban, somebody asked Commissioner Giamatti, will this affect his eligibility for the Hall of Fame? And Giamatti looked at the crowd of sports writers, the people who have a vote on the Hall of Fame, and said, well, that'll be up to you. He had no intention of keeping him out of the Hall of Fame. That was not his purview, and that was not part of the ban. That was just something they made up later to try to keep him out. Yeah.
Wow. I had no idea that's the case. I'm so glad I asked you about this. How did the lifetime ban start looking differently, and you get into this a bit in your book, Pete Rose, An American Dilemma, around the time that it was revealed that so many players, including some of the biggest names in the game, were cheating using performance-enhancing drugs?
So I think it changes it in a certain way, right? Like that the steroid use clearly impacted the game. That's obvious to see, right? It impacted the history of the game in certain ways through statistics. It impacted outcome. But people were still paying to come out and see guys jacked up on steroids hit the ball over the wall. It didn't affect the business of baseball unless you would have argued it affected it positively. The gambling, we don't know. There's absolutely no evidence that Pete ever bet on his team to lose, and there's no reason to suspect that at all, and there's no reason to think a game was ever compromised. But it certainly could have been. So the danger of what could have happened through the gambling was far greater, right? Like now Pete's in $500,000 to a betting ring. Would he compromise the game, or is there just a perception of that? Now you could have done something that would have really hurt baseball at the gate, hurt its popularity. And to me, in some ways, the gambling is more dangerous, even though the steroids was, sort of a betrayal of another sort. So they're analogous in some ways. And it's not even a moral judgment. It's almost a practical judgment of how, the gambling was more dangerous to the business of baseball and the integrity of baseball in a sense than steroids was, even though steroids did impact statistics, as I said, and outcomes.
What about the era in which we're living in now? And this really exploded after your book was released, where so much of the game itself is reliant upon gambling. You turn on any Major League Baseball game and you see right behind home plate there's a sign for DraftKings. Every commercial in almost every inning of every baseball game is DraftKings, FanDuel, sports book after sports book. Obviously, it's different when a manager or a player is doing it, but is there an element of hypocrisy there that Major League Baseball is relying on sports betting to boost interest in the game and to boost ad revenue in the game, and yet Pete Rose for decades wasn't even able to set foot on a baseball diamond?
I don't really see it as analogous, and you kind of made the point here when you said it's different if a player or a manager were to bet. Right? A player or manager cannot bet on baseball then or now or ever in the history of baseball, right? So in a sense, the surrounding culture hasn't changed the essential truth at all. You are not allowed, and if you are banned to bet on the game, period. Certainly in perception, a sort of tolerance of gambling, and I think it's a calculated risk that baseball is taking in all sports. That they sort of gave in to the pressure, right? It increases attention and increases revenue by so much to have gambling. We've obviously seen that it supports football essentially. That you can't really turn your back on it. There are other dangers too about whether you would begin to lose sort of allegiance to specific teams and all that. But I don't see it as really the external thing being that much different. I think that if somebody did what Pete Rose did today, they would get the same punishment, and deservedly so. Like it's not, you just can't do that. You can't, question the integrity of the game. So, I just think it hasn't changed that much at the core.
Talking with Kostya Kennedy, he's the author of the book Pete Rose, An American Dilemma. Two-part question here, Kostya. Yep. Given your research for the book and everything that you did in supporting the book in terms of interviews and all the work that you put into it, and everything that's happened since the book has come out, and given the fact that Pete Rose finally admitted that he participated in betting on sports, one, what was your conclusion about whether Pete Rose should be reinstated and subsequently admitted to the Hall of Fame? And two, just to put on your prediction hat, now that he's passed, do you think he'll ultimately get into that Hall of Fame?
Part one, I guess I would say I'm not really going to commit. I really see the argument either way. He was such an extraordinary player. There's no question he's Hall of Fame worthy, and so in that sense, yes. But again, what he did was far more dangerous than you or I betting $20 with a friend on the game, right? He really jeopardized it. So I don't want to say whether I think he should be in or should not be in. What I do think is a real disservice is that he was never allowed to be voted on. That they put in that rule about 10 months before his eligibility, which said if you're on baseball's ineligible list, you are not eligible for the Hall of Fame. And they just made up that rule to keep Pete out. He's the only player ever who's been kept out because of that, like Joe Jackson, who famously threw the 1919 World Series, was eligible to be voted in from the time the Hall of Fame opened until they put in this Pete Rose Well, he wasn't voted in, but he could have been. Pete never got that chance. Again, unlike the steroid guys like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, people are voting on them. They haven't gotten in, but they've had their years to be voted on, and Pete never got that. To me, I think that's a disservice, and then people could decide. I think that there will be a new conversation a little bit, because obviously he's not a threat to the game in any way since he's passed away. Symbolically, though, it's still troubling to sort of have somebody who who bet the way he did. I don't know whether there's going to be a change in the outcome anytime soon, meaning in his eligibility or actually getting back into the game or the Hall. But I do think there'll be some discussion about it, and some minds will change. I just don't know whether it's going to be enough to make the difference.
He did make it, though, into the WWE Hall of Fame, in spite of the fact that he didn't have the kind of wrestling career that most WWE Hall of Famers have had. In some respects, you could see his inclusion in that Hall of Fame as being just as controversial as his exclusion from the Baseball Hall of Fame. How did you see that, Kostya?
Well, somebody who years ago covered a little bit of professional wrestling, I think he held his own against Kane, and he did pretty well. And I think he brought enough attention to it that it's fine with me to have him in that Hall of Fame. The other place I will say, when Rob Manfred upheld Pete's ban 5 or 6 years ago, whenever exactly it was, denying his request for reinstatement, Manfred explicitly said, but this should not keep him out of any museums or fan places. And the Cincinnati Reds took that and immediately put him in the Hall of Fame. He's in the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame, right? There's nothing except for the board at the Hall of Fame that's keeping him out from being voted on or elected. So, in terms of WWE, I say the more the merrier. If you brought that kind of attention that Pete did to the Hall of Fame, you could make a case the San Diego Chicken should be in the WWE Hall of Fame.
Exactly.
That's probably a stretch.
Kostya, I got to know you when you were working with Sports Illustrated. Now you're as I alluded to, an editorial director at Dotdash Meredith. Fill our listeners in. What is Dotdash Meredith?
So Dotdash Meredith is a publishing company. Meredith was a long-standing publishing company which bought Time Inc., which had Sports Illustrated and Time, and then Meredith, which published Better Homes and Gardens and other titles, was bought by Dotdash. Dotdash is a company within the IAC family. IAC is Barry Dillard's Interactive Corp., a really tremendously good company with a digital publisher primarily, and some print brands. So we have at Dotdash Meredith People Magazine, Real Simple Magazine, Life Magazine, Eating Well, Food and Wine, a whole long host of really great titles. And we publish primarily digitally, but also there's a strong print component to what we do. So it's a magazine publisher primarily, and digital magazine and digital content publisher.
Well, Kostya Kennedy, a lot of folks, I think, are going to be interested in checking out Pete Rose, An American Dilemma. Even though it's been already out a few years, I think clearly the content that you cover in there is more relevant than ever. It's great to talk with you. Thank you.
My pleasure, Frank. Always good to be on with you. Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, you can give me a call, 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor, or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. Micro-tabb.com.